Now let's talk about the Horn of Africa, the easternmost part of the African continent, home to countries like Somalia, Ethiopia and Kenya. In 2020, a drought gripped the region, the worst of its kind in 4 decades. It devastated the already impoverished region. Now these countries are finally emerging from it, but there is no joy because they're grappling with a new climate catastrophe. Drought has been replaced by deluge. Torrential rain is wreaking havoc across East Africa. Waters are tearing through entire villages. Nearly 300 people have died, over 2 million have been displaced, and over 4 million people are going hungry, including 1.5 million children. And the rains are not over yet. Here's a report.
3 years ago, East Africa was gripped by an unrelenting drought. This was the worst drought in 40 years. The Horn of Africa was left devastated. This region includes countries like Somalia, Kenya and Ethiopia. It's one of the world's most impoverished regions, also one of the most climate vulnerable places despite a fraction of the contribution to global warming. The drought had a catastrophic impact on this region. Livestock starved, crops shriveled, water insecurity increased. 20 million people were plunged into food insecurity. Tens of thousands of people died. 3 years on, prayers have been answered. The region is slowly emerging from the drought, but this is hardly a cause for celebration, because the Horn of Africa has gone from drought to deluge.
During the drought, we were able to walk to get food. Now there is nowhere to walk. Due to the flood, we have water, but we cannot drink it or fish in it.
Torrential rains began in October this year. They sent waters tearing through entire villages, washing through streets, damaging homes, bridges, schools and hospitals. According to newly released UN data, over 2 million people have been displaced across the Horn of Africa. Almost 300 people have been killed. There are fears of disease outbreaks, including cholera and malaria. The situation is bad, but it varies across countries. Burundi, Sudan, South Sudan and Uganda are all bearing the brunt, but Somalia, Kenya and Ethiopia are the worst hit. This is a once-in-a-century flooding in Somalia. 1.7 million people have been affected. At least 100 have died. About 4.3 million people are going hungry. 1.5 children under the age of 5 face acute malnutrition. In neighboring Kenya, at least 136 people have died in floods. 460,000 people have been displaced.
We feared that our children would drown in the floods because paths in the village have been washed away. There is water all over, and we found ourselves trapped with our animals. So we ran here with the children where it's safe.
Meanwhile, in Ethiopia, the situation is difficult, but in a different way. Northern Ethiopia is still suffering from drought, but the southern and eastern parts of the country have been hit by flooding, due to which over 600,000 people have been displaced and at least 57 people have died. Somalia declared a national emergency in October, but Kenya fell short of doing the same. There is anger among people, especially as governments are scrambling to find money to help those in need, leading to less action and more political debates. Like in Kenya, where discussions of allocation of funds for flood victims have led to disputes. There's no question, though, that these countries need more funds to tackle the floods. And they need it fast, because by the looks of it, the flood is not going away anytime soon.
We have currently a confluence still of the Indian Ocean dipole, of El Nino. We have a cyclone building up in the Indian Ocean. We have rains continuing in the highlands of Ethiopia. All of that means that this is not over and it's not yet at its peak. It's getting worse and these people are going to suffer more.
At this point, East Africa needs a miracle to tide them over this devastation, because the rains aren't over yet and a flood of problems await the Horn of Africa.